Network Dojo.
Open network login page. Here we go. Okay, so try to go to something, I guess. Maybe it needs to be DNS resolvable. But we're gonna basically just be asked for a lot of that same information. So okay, what's my admin username? What's the password for this? What's the system name? MEWLC, I'll call this one 2, I guess. Date, time, have no way to not configure this, but it looks pretty normal. I think it just pulls this from my browser information because it just happens to match that and happens to know I'm in Central Time, which would be odd if that wasn't the case. I could configure an NTP server. I'll just leave that one blank. What's the management IP address? 10.08.22. I'm on a different subnet. 10.08.1. Do I want DCP on the management interface? Nope. Let's go down to number 2 here, create your wireless networks. I don't want an employee network. I don't know if it actually lets me do this. Let's see. Yeah, so this is one of the frustrating parts about the GUI. I can't get by without configuring at least one SSID. So I guess I'll make it a guest network. Seriously? Well, let me use 0. I hate you. I'll say that. I'm going to delete it anyways, but still. Frustrating that I have to do this here where I don't have to do it in the CLI. The RF parameter optimizations, it's really basic. Low, medium, typical, or high from a client density and the traffic type of data or data and voice. Based off of what you configure, it's just going to set a whole bunch of things like, data rates and boy, I don't even know everything that it does. Maybe like some TPC, DCA type stuff. A smorgasbord. So I guess if they specify, pick one of these things, you pick it. Otherwise, we're probably just going to do it manually. So again, I'll leave it off. All right, do I like all these things? I suppose. System will reboot. Okay. Saving the config, and then it's going to reboot. But you're already in the CLI from before. Why do this and then force yourself to have to delete the WLAN once you're done here? So I wouldn't do the GUI setup unless you're actually directed, I guess, to use the GUI setup, and I don't know how they could even tell. So, like I said, my recommendation: just use the CLI for everything. And let me get rid of this. My wonderful client. Okay. But at this time, I'm guessing LAP2 is back up. So if we scroll back up through the history, we see, just like before, it boots up the AP image. It's an AP for a little bit. Looks for another master controller out there or another Mobility Express capable AP. If there's already a master, it's just going to defer to that master. If there's another non-master Mobility Express capable AP and no master, an election happens, but that's not the case. So this ultimately just said, you know what? I need to boot up my controller. Boots it up. Now I'm in the controller CLI. And what do you know? I have one AP already joined to it. It happens to be itself. Here. Config AP name LAP2. So the CLI is really the same CLI. There's almost no differences. There are a couple slight changes for some Mobility Express stuff, I think, but by and large, it's the exact same CLI on a 5508. So once you know how to configure one, you know how to configure the other, whether you learn it on a 5508 and use that here or learn it here, then you can use it on a 5508. That's the idea, though. So once we are on the master AP here, we're booted up into the controller. Remember, it's both a controller and it's an AP as well. And so what if I want to get to the CLI of the AP? Because I'm on the console port right now. There's a command for that. AP Cisco shell. Enter. At this point, I would be logging into the AP. Now, an interesting side effect of Mobility Express, when I configured that information on the Mobility Express AP and said, my management user is admin, the management password is Dojo123, it pushes those configs down to any AP that joins up to it. Those become the management credentials of every subordinate AP, including itself. So now I have to log in with admin and Dojo123. So while the default credentials are Cisco, 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 this overwrites them. And again, on any subordinate AP that joins this, will also get these new credentials applied to them as well. So one kind of difference that we see in Mobility Express that is definitely different than what we see on a 5508. So now I'm in the CLI of the AP persona, and I can do all the normal AP commands within here. When I want to get back into the controller persona, I just need to log out twice, and now I'm back into the controller persona. So that's how we flip back and forth between the AP CLI and the controller CLI on the master AP. LAP4 should, looks like it's in the midst of everything, but eventually that should boot up too. And so right now we have two competing Mobility Express APs, that master APs, because they are in different VLANs. They don't see each other for the election, thus they both become master APs. APs could join either one of them. So we might have sort of this split deployment type of a scenario that I find very doubtful in the actual lab. And so what we'll probably do here is I'm going to reboot this one. Oh, it hasn't rejoined up yet, so this is still Cisco, Cisco. Yeah, now the controller interface is booting up. But that AP persona is still using the default credentials until it joins up to the controller for the first time, at which point new config gets pushed down. So that's why I couldn't log in with the admin account yet on the AP persona. Okay, but this is the controller persona. Just reset it. Don't need to save the changes. Yes, reboot. While it reboots, I'm going to move this over to VLAN 107. So this is on Cat4, gig 104, switch port. See, is it a trunk? At the moment, it's an access port, and that's okay for now, but once we start supporting VLANs, it does need to be a trunk. But for this video, I can leave it on an access mode. So switch port, access, VLAN 107. So now when it boots up, it's going to boot up the AP persona first, always. It's going to pull an address in VLAN 107. It's going to see that there is an existing master AP already established on this VLAN. And so regardless of any preference setting about LAP4, it's going to defer to the existing master, stay just as a CapWAP AP, and it should join up to it because it'll discover it thanks to broadcast discovery method. They're on the same VLAN. And so we don't need to do anything special to make LAP4 want to join LAP2. Now, in the lab, though, when we talk about, actually, you know what? That's for a different video. I was going to talk about some join stuff, but I have a separate video for that coming up, so we won't worry about that right now. All right, so I will hit pause here until this finishes its reboot, and we'll come back and we'll see that LAP4 has joined up to LAP2. LAP2 is still the master AP. Okay, so LAP4 has completed its reboot, and we actually get some really great logs on these types of APs for this. So it booted up the AP persona, pulled an IP address via DHCP, moved into discovery phase. So it remembered that it had previously joined 10.0.8.22, so it sent a discovery request there, which nothing lives there at the moment because the controller persona has not booted up. We also sent a discovery response, we got a discovery response from 10.0.7.22 thanks to the broadcast method. And so it joined 10.0.7.22 because that's the only controller it got a response from. And so it received a join response, and it actually joined up to a controller called MEWLC. So if I look at LAP2, show AP summary, we should see that I now have two APs joined up. Itself, LAP2, and then here is the name for LAP4. So let's rename that one. Config AP name, LAP4, whoops. Okay, so we have LAP2 as the master AP. LAP4 is just a subordinate AP, even though it is Mobility Express capable. But because it's Mobility Express capable, we should have synced the controller config now from LAP2 over to LAP4, so that if LAP2 goes away, LAP4 will take over as the controller. And let's do that. Let's just reboot LAP2. LAP4 will detect LAP2 going away, and it will boot up the Mobility Express Master AP persona on itself. So let's just do that real quick, and then we'll take a look at some stuff in the GUI, and then see preferring one AP over another as the master AP. Okay, so I guess reset system. Yeah, I guess I'll save changes. I don't know what they are, but I'll save them. Okay, so let's watch the logs on LAP4. I don't think it'll take super long for it to detect that LAP2 has gone away. Okay, so LAP2 is in fact rebooting. Now VRRP is working on the back end. We should detect through VRRP that the other side has stopped responding. We'll mark it as dead. We should move into an election phase. There are no other Mobility Express capable APs in this VLAN, and thus LAP4 will take over that master AP role, boot up the controller persona, and use the config that was on LAP2 for the controller in LAP4 here. So we'll see that it has the same controller name. It has that same 10.0.7.22 IP address. Here we go. So we're seeing some... This is actually the AP detecting a loss to its controller. This is not the VRRP messages. So it's taking a little bit. Taking longer than I had anticipated it. LAP2 still booting. Come on, LAP4. And then if there were other APs joined up to the controller, obviously those tear down their connections. They're all going to be in standalone mode waiting for an AP to join up to, which should be LAP4 if it would get its butt in gear. All right, well, let's just pause. We'll wait the time it takes to boot up, and we'll come back after LAP4 has booted up the controller persona. All right, well, LAP4 finally did boot up the controller persona. So it finished the boot at, what, 21:23:50. So it took a while, honestly, longer than I remembered. So if we scroll back in the logs, it went... So it started detecting the loss of responses from LAP2 here. This is where it moved into standalone mode when it knew that its controller was gone. So that was at 21:21:42. And it wasn't until there was these messages. So that was 21:21:42. So about a minute later, we saw some of these, but then it actually finished its boot at 21:23. So I guess, I mean, it's only a couple minutes. Feels longer when I have a camera rolling on me, I guess. But it took until, I mean, LAP2 had actually finished its reboot and was in the process of, pulling its IP address before LAP4 actually finally kicked in. But LAP4 indeed is the controller now. Show AP summary. We see that LAP2 has joined up to LAP4 as the master AP, as well as it joined up to itself. Show interface summary. We see our management interface here is using that 10.0.7.22. Show, what is it? Show sysinfo. We see the system name, MEWLC. So it's definitely using the config it got from controller 2, because the config that I used when I set LAP4 up originally through its initial configuration process, it was MEWLC2. It used 10.0.8.22. So that config is gone. And it's grabbed the config synced from the master controller that was running on LAP2. And now LAP2, would be getting any configs synced from LAP4 as the master AP now. So if I make changes to the controller config on LAP4, that'll sync down to LAP2 so that if LAP4 goes away, LAP2 can boot up with the latest config that was on the master controller. So there's an example of this redundancy that we get when we have multiple Mobility Express capable APs on the same VLAN. Now, the last couple things here would be, let's say that we want to prefer one AP over the other. LAP2 is an 1852, maybe it's got beefier specs, I don't know. So let's say that we want LAP2 to be the preferred master AP if there is an election happening. So this is configured through the controller interface. So I'm on the master AP right now. So it should be config AP next preferred master. And then it's going to want the name of the AP that should be the next preferred master. So I'll say LAP2. So now we would save the config. And I don't know if this is where this might be where the syncing happens when you do the save config. It might sync it at that time. I don't know if it's just constantly syncing. That's a question mark that I have, but definitely save your config and we definitely should be good. And now I think if we just rebooted one controller, I mean one AP, the other AP just naturally takes over like we saw. So I think what we would want to do is we actually want to reboot both things at the same time. And I've tested this, they actually boot up like almost identically the same fast. So they do get into an election and thus one would beat out the other. And it has followed, in my experience, the one that was configured as the next preferred master. Before I reboot, let's take a look at the GUI real quick. So let's pull this up. HTTPS, the IP address of the management interface on the controller. I suppose I'll make an exception here. Let's log in with the management credentials. All right, so I mentioned it before, very simplistic GUI that we have inside here. We have the monitoring, which is just informational stuff within here. We can see that we have two APs currently inside here. Don't have any clients. We're detecting rogue APs and clients over here. Settings. So we have things like our WLANs. We can see the APs that are joined up inside here and do some basic configurations on the APs themselves. But when we're looking at the access points on this list, the one with the P is the master controller, or the master AP, sorry. Everything else would be subordinate APs. And so if I went into configure, this little button or link on the left-hand side here, if I configure LAP2 and I want to make LAP2 to be the more preferred controller, that's what this make me controller box is here. So this should set it to the next preferred controller, and it would actually also reboot LAP4 at the same time to force the failover to happen now rather than on the next election cycle. We can do that force over in the CLI as well. If we add this forced failover at the end, that would force the controller to reboot, making the next one essentially forcing an election. If there were multiple potential failover targets, LAP2 would be the one that would win that election. Thanks to this config, it would become the master AP. So if we want to force it to happen, that's in the lab, that's what I would do. So just automatically reboot LAP4 for me. LAP2 will take over the master. LAP4 will boot up and join LAP2. But if you actually want to see that election happen, let's do that. So I am going to, again, I did save the config. So I'm going to get into the AP shell. I'm going to reboot these as close as possible as I can. So I'll do the reload command on both. Oops, enable. Okay, so they're going to reboot, and if it does the same thing that I've done in testing, they'll reboot like almost identically the same. So we'll jump to after they get into the point where they've pulled their IP address, and that's when the election should happen. So I'll be back in just a couple seconds. Okay, so they've completed their reboot, and they've just pulled IPs, and if you look at the timestamps, 21:31:18 versus 21:31:16, they're literally 2 seconds away from each other in this entire process. So they both booted up at the same time. They pulled their IP addresses within a couple seconds of each other. Thus, we definitely should be getting into an election process here. And so what we should see is LAP2 win. And there we go. LAP2 is booting up the controller persona. LAP4 did not. Now it's moving into its discovery phase as a regular old AP. And we've already got a response, so it booted up that fast. And now we should see it join. Show AP summary. There we go. APs have joined up inside of here. So yeah, let me see if I can remember the command. If we have a show command for the next preferred AP. Show AP. Yep, next preferred master. So the configured master AP, LAP2. So if you want to check it, and this is probably how they would grade it in the lab, show AP next-preferred-master lets you know which AP is set as the preferred master. This would be the one that would win any election once we get into an election. And that's kind of the end. So now we have a controller operating. We have the master AP. We have redundancy. We've seen how we can prefer one over the other, force that failover to happen. So let's talk about a few last points, and then we'll wrap this video up. All right, so some key things that I want you to know and remember about Mobility Express, because if you remember these things, just about all the other things that we do within Mobility Express is going to make a whole lot of sense. So remember, the master AP is both a controller and an AP on the same device, operating independently from each other, meaning that they need their own IP addresses, they have their own configs, their own processes. The APs joining to a master AP will be placed into Flex Connect mode automatically every single time. So the only supported AP mode in Mobility Express is Flex Connect mode. And so everything will be Flex Connect. APs joining to the master AP will only use the default Flex Connect group. We can't create other ones. So everything that we do is under the context of every AP is Flex Connect and every AP is in the default Flex Connect group. All WLANs configured on the master AP always use Flex Connect local switching. It's automatically enabled. You can't do anything about it. There is no central switching in Mobility Express. And so again, every config that we do needs to follow these truths. And so if you configure everything as if all my APs are Flex Connect mode APs in the default Flex Connect group, doing Flex Connect local switching, you'll configure things just the correct way as if you did it on a 5508 controller. And the things that are supported or not supported when we talk about only local switching is possible, only Flex Connect mode APs, you'll naturally start to learn a number of things. Oh, we just can't do these things in Mobility Express because I need local mode APs to do that, or I need central switching to do that. If it can't be supported on Flex Connect local switch, it absolutely will never be supported in Mobility Express. That's not to say that everything that can be done on Flex Connect local switching is supported here, but definitely anything that requires central switching will never work. There is no RRM or mobility configuration coordination, with our 5500s or our virtual wireless LAN controllers. So we're never going to be able to build mobility group lists with a 5508 and anchor something to a 5508. One, because you can't build the mobility group, and number two, you need central switching for anchoring, right? There is no RF group building between Mobility Express and a 5508, and that's on purpose. This is supposed to be a standalone solution for a smaller office. And they are enforcing that design with some of these decisions. And so, again, keep all this in mind, and the configs oftentimes become very self-evident. The types of things that you can and can't do oftentimes become very self-evident. We'll talk about all these things in detail within all the subsequent videos here. But these are the truths that we use within Mobility Express. And lastly, get good in the CLI. meaning that while yes, we have a GUI, it's crazy simple. We'll look at things that we can do in the GUI, and so you'll know what you can do there. And there's one thing that I do leverage the GUI for. But by and large, learn it in the CLI because it's very low likelihood that we're going to be able to do everything inside the GUI. So get good in the CLI.